So, yeah, if it's not recognizable from here, we'll go ahead and,
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's anniversary event. I want to thank the members of Congress who will be joining us. We have mayors from a couple different cities, labor, workers, and families here today. My name is Michael Baldwin. I join you as president of the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen and chairman of the Rail Labor Division of TTD. Prior to those positions, I actually worked in the field as a railroad signalman, so I have seen and experienced some of what you are going to hear about today. We're gathered here today to mark an anniversary that never should have happened. 3 years ago in East Palestine, Ohio, a freight train derailed and unleashed toxic chemicals into a community that did nothing to deserve it. Families were forced from their homes, schools were closed, water, air, and soil were poisoned, and fear that lingers to this day, took hold. Let's say this plainly, because the truth matters. This was not a fluke. This was not bad luck. It was a foreseeable result of a system that has been allowed, even encouraged, to put profits ahead of safety. For years, rail workers have been sounding the alarm. We warned of longer trains with fewer crew members. We warned of rushed inspections. We warned about outdated braking systems. We warned about relentless pressure to move faster, haul more, and do it all with less. Railroads have never voluntarily allowed for more safety measures and fight every attempt for uniform standards across the board. Today, we are calling on Congress to act and pass the Railway Safety Act. We weren't asking for special treatment. We were asking for basic safety for ourselves and for the communities we pass through every single day. And when Norfolk Southern Train 32N derailed, it wasn't corporate executives who rushed towards the danger. It was rail workers. It was firefighters, EMTs, and public safety officers, first responders who showed up without full information, without clear guidance, and without protections they deserved. That is a failure of leadership, and it is a failure we must not repeat. Safety regulations are not obstacles to progress. They are the guardrails that keep people alive. Technology should not replace people. Technology should be an added overlay to the current safety on the rails. Regulations and technology are the difference between a job done right and a disaster waiting to happen. Strong rail safety regulations mean reasonable train lengths and adequate staffing. They mean carbon inspections that are not timed to a point where the inspection is rendered useless. They mean preventive measures like defect detectors being regulated. They mean clear communication when hazardous materials are moving through our towns. And they mean accountability, real accountability, when corporations cut corners and put lives at risk. This is not anti-business. This is pro-worker. This is pro-community. This is pro-common sense. No town should become a sacrifice zone. No worker should be told that an injury or a death is just part of the job. No first responder should be sent into a chemical emergency without the truth. So today, we honor East Palestine not just with remembrance, but with resolve. Resolve to strengthen rail safety regulations by passing the Railway Safety Act, not roll back regulations. We resolve to have railroads listen to workers before, not after, disaster happens. We resolve for the carriers to protect the people who protect us. And resolve to build an industry culture that values human life more than corporate profit. Because when we stand up for safety, we stand up for dignity. When we stand up for workers, we stand up for families. And when we demand change, we make sure what happened here never happens again. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a few comments this morning from Rail Labor. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. He and I met each other when we were Secretary-Treasurers of our individual organizations and have been working together since as AFL unions. I present to you the President of the International Association of Firefighters, Ed Kelly.
Thank you, President Baldwin. As Michael graciously said, I have the honor and distinction of being the General President of the International Association of Firefighters, representing 365,000 paid professional firefighters, paramedics, and EMTs and dispatchers throughout North America. And as firefighters, we are all hazard responders. Whatever goes wrong, we are the first on scene to try to put the pieces back together. We show up first. But too often, firefighters arrive at train derailments with limited information and limited training, even when those train derailments result in hazardous materials being exposed. First due crews are expected to make immediate decisions without full situational awareness. The risk of injury and long-term toxic exposure ensues. The Railway Safety Act fixes that. It requires reliable, real-time hazmat information. The firefighters arriving know the dangers that they're facing on scene rather than discovering through long-term exposure. The Railway Safety Act doubles the federal hazmat funds to $4 million. Not a large sum of money in the scheme of the federal budget, but that money trains thousands of firefighters every year. Millions of Americans live and work along hazmat railways. We need to protect them. We need to protect every community and, ultimately, every firefighter that responds to a derailment. This act would strengthen inspections, standards, and enforcement, preventing derailments and reducing their severity. We call on Congress to protect the public and pass the Railway Safety Act now. I'd now like to ask the Mayor of Altoona, Pennsylvania, Mayor Matt Pacifico, to come up and say a few words. Mayor.
Good morning. I'm Matt Pacifico, Mayor of Altoona, Pennsylvania. Altoona is a city born of the railroad. Founded by the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1849 as an operational hub, we later became home to the largest steam locomotive repair shop in the world and the iconic Horseshoe Curve. Railroading isn't just part of our history, it's part of our identity. And because of that, rail safety is not an abstract issue for us, it's personal. In September of 2014, a 17-car derailment occurred on the main line, right in the heart of our downtown. I didn't learn about it from the railroad. I learned about it from a reporter calling my office for comment. That moment made something very clear. When it comes to rail safety, communication between railroads and the communities they pass through is not where it needs to be. Local leaders and first responders should never be the last to know when something happens on the tracks that run through the center of their cities. Effective rail safety depends not only on what happens on the rails, but on how well railroads communicate with the people responsible for protecting the public where those rails run. That's why we support the creation of a liaison position within the Federal Railroad Administration, dedicated to ensuring clear, consistent communication between railroads and local elected officials and public safety agencies. This isn't about placing blame, it's about partnership. It's about railroads being good neighbors in the communities across the country by keeping us informed and involved. Because when communication improves, rail safety improves for everyone. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to now call up Mayor Michael Lombardo of Pittston, Pennsylvania. Mayor.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Lombardo, as Matt said, the mayor of the city of Pittston, located in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about elected perspective, more so than specific events. Northeastern Pennsylvania, like much of the Commonwealth, was driven by industry. And in the day when industry was hopping, the coal industry was the industry that moved in northeastern Pennsylvania. And from a perspective, as that industry sort of went away, things got lax and we started to see less train traffic. And then probably about a decade or so ago, the Marcellus gas field was identified, and we started to see an uptick then in rail traffic. The problem with the situation, and as mayor, when we look at things, two things I want to say. public safety is always most important. I come from a family who I have siblings that are firefighters. I have a nephew who is currently a firefighter in our department. So, as Matt indicated, finding out information in an information age is disappointing when I think the technology and the support network is there to make sure that information comes through. The other thing I would say is, as you look at the change in industry and you see the uptick in rail, I certainly recognize and I think that rail plays an important part in the economic transportation system. And quite honestly, if done correctly and with the right safety measures in place, it can help alleviate other transportation issues and alleviate some of the strain on our highways. So I don't think any of us are standing here today not advocating for the use of rail. I think we all recognize that it is an important part of commerce, an important part of our economics, particularly in northeastern Pennsylvania. But I think what we are saying is that in this era, we should not rely on atavistic rules that really, because the railroad was used less, weren't updated. And that's what we face. There hasn't been a brought forward, I think, in terms of legislation. So we respectfully ask that Congress consider legislation and the Rail Safety Act that would help put those measures in place to make sure that rails grow, but they grow in a safe and effective way, and that information is distributed in a safe and effective way to our communities. Because many of those communities have changed over that period of time, and as Matt indicated, we have rails that come right through our cities and right through our communities. So please, you have the authority to make the change, and we respectfully ask that you consider to make those changes. Thank you. And now I'm introducing TTD President Greg Reagan. Greg.
Good morning. I'm Greg Regan. I'm the president of the Transportation Trades Department, AFL-CIO. We are the largest transportation labor federation in the country, representing 40 unions across all modes of transportation and including every single worker in freight and passenger rail in this country. I want to start off by underscoring one thing that Mayor Lombardo just mentioned, which is that nobody up here, not a single person in this room right now, is advocating towards for hurting the railroads. We actually want to see the railroads grow. We think they're an important economic driver in this country. We think they're the best way to move a lot of these goods long hauled across the country in a way that is most efficient, best for communities, best for our economic development. But when you look at the direction where safety is going on Class 1 railroads, it should be alarming. It would be alarming in any other industry. There would be a reckoning if we had the types of numbers we're talking about in Class 1 railroads and freight rail, if we had it in aviation or transit or trucking. Any of those industries would be dragged up here, and they would be forced to deal with the consequences of their own actions, their own ability to try to self-regulate and deny that there's any real problem. But just look at the numbers. The derailment rate on mainline tracks have increased 25% over the last decade. Hazardous material released into our environments, into our communities, has jumped by 23% during that same period. That is an unacceptable level of risk and one that we should be demanding better of. Congress should be demanding it. Unions should be demanding it. And from the jump, this is not a bipartisan issue. It hasn't been from the very beginning. Right off the bat, when this tragedy happened, former Senators Sherrod Brown from Ohio and the current Vice President J.D. Vance led the effort in the Senate to try to push rail safety. We saw at least 3 bipartisan bills here in the House, including one led by those members who are coming to speak today at some point here. But this is not a partisan issue. Former President Biden, current President Trump, all voiced support for railway safety. This is something that can and needs to be addressed. And I know we have a number of people, a number of residents of East Palestine right now watching us on this feed because they recognize the consequences that happen in their community when there aren't the right safety protocols in place, when they don't have a worker's voice that is directing where the risks are, where we don't hear the first responder's voice to identify what they need in an emergency. That is what we're allowing to do the more we let this just sort of sit there, the more we do not demand action, do not demand more accountability from this giant economic driver in our country. One that can do better, one that must do better, and one that the labor movement is ready to work with you all to make sure that we can actually achieve a rail system we can all be proud of. I do not want to be back here next year or at the 5-year anniversary, or the 10-year anniversary, or heaven forbid when there's another tragedy, one that shocks another community, or even worse, one where lives are lost because of that tragedy. We cannot accept that as the status quo that is good enough. So if you look up here and you have all of our advocates from local government to labor to first responders, you know, we're here because we want to remind people that communities, workers, regulators, we are here to hold people accountable. We're here to hold members of Congress accountable on both sides to make sure that we can actually get the reforms that are necessary to make this an industry that is truly can thrive and truly drive our country forward into the next century here. So with that, I know we have a little bit of time before our guests are going to arrive, but I wanted to take this opportunity to open up a little bit for a few questions while we have a moment. Yes, sir.
Hello, Zach Wayne from Bloomberg.
Hi. Good to see you.
So who's holding up this bill?
Well, look, I think that's been, I don't think you can point the blame at any particular area. We've had a rail safety hearing here on the House side. We've seen a bill that moved out of Congress on the Senate side last Congress. We haven't seen floor time. And I don't think you can put that on any one blame, but it just, frankly, it just hasn't seemed to be a priority. And I think, more importantly, this is what the industry was hoping would happen. They're hoping that there'd be a lot of pomp and circumstance, there'd be a lot of attention. Everyone sees the images of the fireball over a small town. But, you know, if we push it down the road a little bit longer, people will forget there'll be another thing that happens, and then, you know, that's just sort of how the long-term memory in politics can work sometimes. So I think it's really just the industry was counting on lethargy. They were counting on another big issue popping up and using their own economic weight and their own influence in the regulatory and legislative fields to try to delay it further and hope that, you know, we can get to some other thing. But ultimately, we need floor time in both chambers. We wanted it when the Democrats were in charge of the Senate. We want it when Republicans are in charge of both. There's clearly interest from both parties to move this forward, and I think that's what we need to continue to build that support.
When you refer to the industry, are you referring to like AAR specifically?
Certainly AAR, the Class 1 railroads, yes. The lobbying industry who don't want to be further regulated. And just to sort of put a finer point on that, if you look at the industry's vision of how they should be regulating themselves, they told us all at the beginning of the year when they filed their comprehensive regulatory reform agenda with the FRA. Their reform agenda was essentially to eliminate all the regulations currently in place that they don't like, that may cost them money. We are advocating to say that, no, those are there for a reason, and in fact, we need to go farther. We need to have a safer, we need to implement a lot of these reforms that we're advocating for in this bill, because otherwise, it's only a matter of time before we end up right back here with another tragedy in a different community who's watching on TV to try to figure out, what do we do now? Any other questions? Yes.
Norfolk Southern is party to this, proposed merger that would, really upend the industry. To what extent do you see issues like what happened in East Palestine, kind of conflicting with this proposed deal?
Well, look, I think that any major merger like this that is subject to regulatory scrutiny, but in this case from the STB, Surface Transportation Board, it provides an opportunity to dig deeper into the practices of those entities that are trying to merge. So I think service, the level of service they're providing for their customers, the level of safety for workers and for communities, those need to be the hard questions that are asked, because unless they have a plan for making sure that this is going to operate safely and that we're going to fulfill our common carrier obligations, that's not necessarily a merger that's going to be best for everybody. But again, it could be. It's just a matter of making sure that regulators are asking the right questions. So I hope that we're having a real dialogue about the industry as a whole, and that includes safety and includes service. Yes?
This isn't exactly your wheelhouse, but talking about the settlement that Norfolk Southern was going to pay to East Palestine, do you feel that, that's been caught up in litigation, but do you feel that could be one way to hold companies accountable if they have to pay for that health monitoring?
Well, I honestly, I haven't looked at all the details of the settlement. It is, again, between the citizens and their lawsuit there. I do think that enforcement mechanisms in general need to be better in terms of our regulators, and that includes FRA from a safety side and also the Surface Transportation Board from the economic side. I think we need to have enough tools in the toolbox of regulators to effectively do their jobs. And we've in fact supported a bill that would reauthorize the Surface Transportation Board and give them a few more tools to help do that. So we should always be looking at ways to improve. And also, any other questions here? And I do also want to ask if any of our speakers wanted to reply to anything that's been asked so far.
The only thing I would say, subsequent to that question and what you said, is that there's nothing better than there's nothing better than prevention. So, I mean, being prepared to react as opposed to having to react is much better, and I think that's what we're all asking for. I don't know, what kind of cost can you put on prevention? As far as I'm concerned, there's no cost. So, that's the other piece of this thing, I think. We've looked at other transportation entities and looked at how safety has been funded within those. So that's the other, I think, part of this consideration is how do you sort of incentivize also making safety a priority.
All right, with that, two of our congressional leaders in this issue, stalwarts for rail safety, have arrived. Congressman Rulli, Congressman DeLuzio. I'll let it for you. Thanks, buddy.
Good to see you. Thanks for waiting for us. We just both came from the floor. Mike, you beat me here somehow. Of course, thank Congressman Rulli for his partnership and his strong advocacy for your constituents in East Palestine alongside my Beaver County, Pennsylvania constituents, our co-leads on the bill, Representatives Lalota and Garamendi. And thank you to everyone who's here today to help bring attention. It's 3 years, a long time, and it's important to see this coalition that's bipartisan, that has labor behind it, that's working to make rail safer. I'm sure others here have talked about what that day was. Our constituents lived through it, seeing the derailment, seeing the toxic fireball, the rush decision that we have since learned that forced that vent and burn and that toxic fireball into the sky, to see first responders from both Ohio and Pennsylvania rush in to help others to keep us safe, and then to see our constituents years on still dealing with their very serious and legitimate concerns around their health and safety. The fight isn't over. We're both in this fight. We're not alone in that fight. See that here today. Thank you to so many who are in that fight. And we also learned what happened that day. And the failed wheel bearing, the rushed vent and burn, the power of the railroad, I think, putting all of us at risk to get their trains moving at the expense of our safety and our health. And for me, the 3 years of inaction from the Congress remains unacceptable. So I know we are committed to getting this bill done. It's a straightforward piece of legislation. Reduce the risk of wheel-bearing failures that led to the derailment in East Palestine, increased fines on the railroads that now face a slap on the wrist, stronger requirements for transporting hazardous materials like vinyl chloride that we saw in the derailment in East Palestine, putting 2 workers on every train, minimum crew staffing on every train, and making sure that DOT reports back to us in the Congress about the implementation of the NTSB's recommendations. These are common sense measures. There's bipartisan support for this bill for good reason. It's something that earned the support of both then candidate Donald Trump and then President Joe Biden, that J.D. Vance led with us in the Senate. We ought to get this thing passed. It's got the support. I think you'll see votes from members in both parties. Hopefully we get this thing signed by the president. So I'm excited to introduce my colleague across the border. He's been a great partner on rail safety, Congressman Mike Rulli.
Well, I want to start off thanking Chris. He's been a great partner. This has been a bipartisan issue from day number one. 3 years ago tonight, the night of the disaster, it was late. I was coming home from Columbus. I'm about 14 and a half miles away from ground zero. It was like the apocalypse. Every siren within hearing distance was going off. We didn't know what was going on. The next day I get there, and immediately Governor DeWine and Governor Shapiro were working hand in hand. They were fed a bunch of lies from the corporations, saying that there was a disaster that was going to happen over temperature, and that was a complete lie. When you look at everything that Director Hamady has said from the NTSB, there was mistakes the whole way through. And we want to make sure that never happens again. Chris and I have found, though, there's all kinds of obstacles and snags to allowing one of these safety bills to actually reach the president's desk. It's under our impression that the president wants one of these bills on his desk so he can sign. There's so many different issues and topics to be concerned about rail safety. My mom's father was a railroader for his entire life. So when this started in the State House and now that I'm in Congress, I've actually went to the rail yards and I discovered something. One of the biggest problems we have is an inspection of cars. Inspection of cars are supposed to happen every 5 to 6 months. That is not happening. Every car is supposed to have 8 to 10 minutes to inspect them. They're lucky if they're spending 2 minutes. These are facts. When you look at East Palestine disaster, that railroad back in Damascus, which is about 7.5 miles outside of East Palestine, those bearings had already started locking up. These are problems. These are serious problems. The industry would like to eventually go to autonomous trains. Think about that. Not a living human being on that train. We want to have 2 engineers and a conductor on every train if we can. We want those cars to be inspected if we can. We want Director Hamadi's direction to have an NTSB to have these rail cars that are carrying these poisonous gases to have a better system. None of the flaps on those cars worked at all. When those 5 cars flipped over, that's where you saw that fire happen. We could prevent this in the future. The worst thing about rail safety in this country is every single week there's a derailment. Every single week of the year there's a derailment. We only heard about East Palestine because we had all these chemicals on it. And the way we handled it was horrific. We got to do better. We got to keep pressure on Congress, on both chambers and both sides of the political aisle so we can do better. These things that Chris and I are doing aren't for us. They're not even for them. This is for the general public. We got a lot of headway when we had the commission in Ohio overseeing this, and I had bipartisan support because that same train went through Cleveland, Columbus, went through a dozen cities in Ohio before it even reached East Palestine. And your friends over in the Keystone State, we have farmers that were worried about their crops, they were worried about their agriculture, or they were worried about their livestock being contaminated. We have health concerns for the next 50 years of the people of East Palestine. This is really serious work. We're urging that the chairmen that have these safety bills that are going through their committees, please take one seriously. I think we're tired of actually having more bills come out. This is a good bill. This bill needs our support. This is good for America. This is good for the future of rail safety. Rail safety is important for so many different topics of thought. And one of them is when you look at the highway system, we have so many tractor trailers on those highways, and they're doubles and they're triples. A triple is a train. So why don't we leave it to the experts and keep those containers on trains like they're supposed to be to reach the destination? You know, we've even looked at all these short lines and everything to get more industry involved in the rail system, but we cannot even think about that concept until safety is accomplished. So I can't thank you enough. Our hearts and prayers go out to East Palestine. The anxiety there, I still get there a lot. The anxiety is through the roof. These people are convinced, and a lot of them are already developing cancer. So this is a real thing. We saw, who would ever think Sherrod Brown and J.D. Vance would become partners on this subject, and I'm lucky to have Chris with me. So with that, are we opening up for questions?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm curious, before you're doing this, Congress, to make sure this gets a vote on the House and Senate floor, and do you sense any kind of momentum shift this Congress compared to last Congress?
Well, I hope so. As Congressman Ruley said, one of my and our co-leads in the Senate was then Senator J.D. Vance, who's now the Vice President, who I know has talked about passing rail safety. So we're going to use every tool at both of our disposals and both of our parties to push this. You saw it pass out of committee in the Senate last Congress, so I know that there can be support there. We're going to keep pushing. I serve on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. I put it in my priorities for the surface transportation reauthorization. I'm going to continue to push every way that I can. Anything you want to add, please? Yeah.
Well, we want to make sure that, all the rails are safe, but we want to actually, we don't want to hurt the industry where we cripple them financially. We're willing to talk about amendments. We're willing to talk about whatever we have to do, the hard work and the heavy lifting, to get us to the chairman, to get a committee vote, to get it onto the House floor and to send it over to our honorable friends in the other chamber. But there's a lot of work, but they're going to need some nudging, and that's what makes today so special. A third-year anniversary of such a disaster, we could use this moment and this energy and this passion to actually try to have these chairmen really take this serious. I know they have a lot of things they think are more important, but really, in reality, this, to us, I think is the most important thing.
To what extent are you pressuring the White House to be involved, to lean on this chairman, or the speaker for that matter?
Well, pretty much every single time I have an ability to have a one-on-one. 2 weeks ago, I had a dinner with the speaker, and he asked me what my number one concern was, and I brought this up. So he was going to have discussions with the chairman to see if our version is good, and if our version is not good, what would be wrong with it. Do you want to say a few words?
few?
Yeah, come on up.
Representative Garrett.
Yeah, we're not going to keep the man waiting.
Normally don't do a few words. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership and your leadership in both sides. Bipartisan. This is really an important issue. I represent California, and we do have railroads in California. Some of you may know that also represent 5 of the Northern California oil refineries, all of which are served by rail, moving very dangerous products in and out through urban areas. And we've had our share of almost serious accidents. So this rail safety bill becomes really important in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, which I represent. And why not? What part of this bill makes no sense? Every single piece of it is sensible. The rail companies, we don't want to do that, it's going to hurt us. By the way, the trains ought to be 2 miles long and only 1 engineer on the train. That's not what this bill is. But nonetheless, rail safety is very, very important for the communities. These railroads and the rails run right through the community. I was thinking about Davis, California. I could just go right on down the line, Sacramento. All of those communities are affected by the railroads. And this rail safety bill covers sensible things. It's not complex, but it is very, very important, and we really need to do it. Think I should talk to Johnson? That would be helpful? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the answer is there is strong support in communities all across this nation to put in place better rail safety. We've had accidents. We talked about East Palestine. All of us know that one. But the ones that we don't know are, let's see, you go over the Sierras and you come down the Feather River and, well, what's that thing doing down in the river? Looks like a tank car. How did that happen? Well, we didn't quite maintain the track as we should have maintained it. So there's a lot of different pieces to this. And I want to thank the two of you for your leadership, and thank you for the ability to participate with you on this issue. We're not going to give up. Rail safety is just too important. So we'll continue to push through, get the hearings where we can, maybe little pieces along the way, but this bill is a good step forward, and we urge everyone that cares about the safety of their communities to pay attention to this. Thank you so very much.
Any other questions? All right. Yeah, great.
All right, one last point I want to make. We're having this press conference. This is an important day. It's a sad day that we're 3 years and we're still calling for this common sense action. But this is not the only action. I guarantee you, every single rail worker is going to be out there tirelessly making sure that this bill gets passed, gets signed into law. We think it's a logical vehicle in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act. That would be a lovely place to put it. But we need to get it done and across the finish line. And it's also, this is advocacy that's happening not just here on Capitol Hill, but it's happening all over the country. I want to note the residents of East Palestine and activists there who are launching a new health research program to track and help their community understand the long-term health effects of being exposed to hazardous chemicals. These are the types of things that, frankly, absent federal leadership, communities are relying on themselves, their own activists, their own conscience to push these types of things forward. So, we're following their lead, and we're going to do everything we can up here to work with our colleagues and members of Congress to get this done.
Am I correct that somehow there's about $22 million in this for local agencies to be prepared for rail safety?
Yes. Yeah.
Can I have that in my district?
Yeah. Well, that'll be up to our friends who distribute the funds, but we want to make sure there's much available as possible. Okay, we have 2 more members coming. I understand a few of you must get going.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
All right. All right, we do have 2 other members. Congresswoman Titus, the ranking member, is going to be joining us, as well as Congressman Lawler from New York. So in the meantime, I'm happy to filibuster, or I can answer some more questions, or allow anybody else to answer questions. All right. Welcome back. I want to introduce a good friend of labor and a supporter of this legislation, Congressman Mike Lawler from New York.
All right. Sorry for the delay. We were coming from votes. I know a bunch of my colleagues have already been here, but I want to thank you all for being here. Across New York and across the country, trains carrying hazardous materials run through our towns, past our schools, and alongside our neighborhoods every single day. When those trains operate safely, most people never give it a second thought. But when they don't, when there's a derailment, a chemical release, or a blocked crossing, the consequences are immediate, dangerous, and sometimes catastrophic. From the derailment in East Palestine, Ohio in 2023 to incidents in recent years in the Hudson Valley, it is clear that strong protections and emergency preparedness are needed. The Railway Safety Act strengthens safety requirements for trains carrying hazardous materials, gives the Department of Transportation the authority to enforce stricter standards on trains, and ensures well-trained two-person crews on every train. It also increases fines for violations of safety regulations, provides support for local first responders and communities impacted by rail disasters, and invests in research and technology to prevent accidents in the future. One critical piece of this bill is transparency and preparedness. Rail carriers will be required to give state emergency response officials advance notice and clear information about the hazardous materials they're transporting. And that way, if something does go wrong, first responders aren't guessing, they're prepared. The bill also tackles a real problem communities in New York know all too well: blocked rail crossings. When crossings are blocked, emergency vehicles can't get through and lives are at risk. This legislation creates enforceable requirements to reduce that danger. Accountability matters too. This legislation significantly increases the maximum fines the Department of Transportation can impose on rail carriers that violate safety rules. If a company cuts corners and puts communities at risk, there must be real consequences. Most critically, though, this legislation invests in the future by expanding hazmat training for local first responders, funding research into better safety technology, and accelerating the phase-out of outdated tank cars. And it's about making sure families in places like the Hudson Valley, Long Island, Ohio, and communities across America don't pay the price for preventable mistakes. Our transportation systems and supply chains need a healthy rail system, and we need to be working together to ensure it's functioning properly. I'm proud to support the Railway Safety Act, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to get this across the finish line. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I want to introduce another champion for this legislation, the ranking member of the Railroad Subcommittee from the state of Nevada, Congresswoman Dina Titus.
Well, thank you all for being here today to talk about this important subject. Thank you to Presidents Reagan and Baldwin for their leadership on this issue, and TTD for putting this together. We've heard the stories, you know, about the incident. It was 3 years ago today that the freight train carrying hazardous materials derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. Now, a lot of talk after that about what we can do to fix it and keep it from happening again, but that's all it was a lot of talk and not a lot of action, and that's what we need to focus on now. As you know, the resulting fire that came about from that derailment and the venting and burning that was conducted over the next few days put a lot of toxic chemicals in the air, in the water, and in the soil. Residents within a mile had to be removed, forced to evacuate, and certainly that upended their lives and their livelihoods. Now today, 3 years later, cleanup is still going on. My heart is with those folks in that community and all those who felt the impact of that incident. Now they deserve real action and real accountability. I'm privileged to serve as the ranking member of the subcommittee on rail and pipeline safety, and so I'm here to tell you I'm committed to enacting these provisions to push forward greater rail safety. Now, each year, the statistics are staggering. 250 million tons of hazardous materials are shipped by rail. They go right through our communities, right by schools, right by churches, right by neighborhoods. I know I represent downtown Las Vegas, and the train tracks go right there to the Union Plaza. So you know what an impact some kind of derailing would have on our economy and on the whole community. And that's why comprehensive rail safety is one of my priorities. So let me put this very clearly on the record. I won't agree to any surface transportation bill as a Four Corners deal or whatever that doesn't have a strong rail safety title. So to put that on the record. And you've heard, we have bipartisan support among our colleagues on T&I to do just that. You've got Representative DeLuzio, Moulton, and Sykes have all introduced bipartisan legislation that deals with rail safety. These are important bills. We've even got the former senator, now a vice president, who had a bill at one time. So we should be able to get this across the finish line. Basically, these bills would implement the recommendations that came from the National Transportation Safety Board when it concluded its investigation after the incident. That was in July 2024. Now, as a result of that investigation, the details it had to do with wheel-bearing regulations were certainly included, and there's certainly something that we need to address. They had previously issued some recommendations or some safety advisories about this topic and other safety topics, but we've come to find out that advisories just aren't enough. You've got to put this in statute because advisories can be suggestions, they can be ignored, they can be put in place half-assed. We need to put it in legislation so we can move forward. So we need provisions in the law that will ensure that these adequate regulations governing wheel bearings and detectors and inspections of those are put in statute. We also need to codify a recommendation without delay in statute to ensure that older tank cars, these DOT 111s, are taken off the rails because we know that they aren't safe and are no longer used to transport hazardous materials. And the third thing that we especially have learned that we need to also put in statute is to establish better lines of communication between the railroads and the first responders who are going to have to help those communities if an incident like this occurs. They need information beforehand, and they need information so they can get there quickly if there is an accident and know just what's on that train so they'll know how to deal with it. Those are just a few of the things that need to go into a rail safety bill, but they are certainly important things and things that I support. So remember, I'm here standing strong with you on this issue, and I won't change my mind, and I won't back down. So thank you for all your support.
All right, that concludes our speaking program, so I'll do a last call for questions if anybody has them. In which case, thank you all very much for being here. I look forward to the signing ceremony when this gets done. Thank you all.